My name is Denisha Jones, and I'm the Executive Director of Defending the Early Years. I'm also a member of the National Black Lives Matter School Steering Committee. I've been working with both organizations. They were almost since they were founded, DEY since 2014, and they were founded in 2012. And I was part of the initial organizing of the National Black Lives Matter School Week of Action, and then joined the National Steering Committee when that work started in the 2017-2018 school year. So today, let me see if I can advance the slides easy enough. No, there we are. All right. So we're going to cover a few things in this hour, and this is just a short introduction. The framework is pretty intense and will require ongoing support, which we will offer to you, and I'll talk about that at the end. But I want to just cover three main things: why this framework, what led to myself and Defending the Early Years creating this, what my position on why I think we need to advance the early childhood education and care field from anti-bias to anti-racist, and then what is this whole goal, which is fostering healthy racial, ethnic, cultural, and identity development. And it's a mouthful, and so I use different terms. Sometimes I just say identity and then development, and then add race, ethnicity, and culture. Sometimes I just say racial identity development, but I always want you to know that I'm always including ethnicity and culture in there, even if I'm not directly stating it. No, they're not all the same, but for many children, if you're affirming their race, you're also affirming their ethnicity and their culture. And so the framework gets into that a little bit, but I just want to make that clear as we get started here. So again, if you have any questions, you can use the chat. I have, like I said, I'm on the screen on both devices, so I can see the chat popping up, and I'll be checking it on here and re-sharing the link. All right, sorry, hold on. Chanel, what do you need me to do? Change the chat settings, and you can help with the chat. How do I do that? I thought I set it up so that everybody can chat to everyone in the chat, but I don't know how to change the chat settings.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. It's the three dots
Fine.
in the top right corner in your chat box, and it looks like everyone can chat with everyone, but if you can change panelists to chat with everyone.
So wait, that doesn't give me hide, deny, hide the, yeah, unfortunately it doesn't show up here in this thing, but so panelists can't talk with everyone?
Not currently, but you can put the the link in the chat as new folks come in, and yeah, I'll
Oh, sorry.
watch
Oh,
from
so
here.
you can't chat with everyone. Okay. I thought you could. I set myself to be able to do that. I apologize. I was playing with the settings before we got started because I wanted there to be no problems, but of course there's problems, but yeah. Okay. And yeah, I'll just keep putting the link in there, and then if you can reshare it, that's great. If not, I totally understand.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. Sorry, everyone.
Awesome. So Chanel's here for Black Lives Matter at school, and she's helping with logistical and tech stuff. So if you do have any issues, then you can message her directly. She's the person. And all right, I think we're good. Yeah, so you can click on the link and copy and paste it. Again, there'll be a QR code. Let me just come back right up front. If you just got here, QR code for the framework. I'll have it again on the last slide. And then I've also put links to the chat, and I'll keep putting those in for people who arrive and don't get to see the chat. All right, so we covered the agenda. So let's get into a little bit about Defending the Early Years. Hopefully you're all familiar with Defending the Early Years, but many of you may not be. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about who we are. So Defending the Early Years was founded in 2012 to really push back against a lot of the school reforms that were happening that were really detrimental to young children, but to also be a voice in the education justice advocacy space for young children, right? There were many groups started at that time, and many people were resisting Common Core standards. They were resisting the testing that went along with it. All of these things, Teach for America, all of these things that were hurting teacher education and teaching in general in public schools, charter school expansion, school to prison pipeline. But a lot of it was not centered on early childhood because there weren't a lot of early childhood voices. So one of the ways Defending the Early Years has been a part of this work is to always be in these spaces where people are fighting for educational justice and to be the voice of early childhood, right? So if you're fighting against standardized testing, what does that mean for young children who often are not taking third grade tests, but they're taking a lot of pre-tests before that, right? How is standardized testing impacting the kindergarten curriculum, right? So what are some ways that we can advocate in those areas? And that's just one example. And we've seen many racial justice organizations take this on, from Badass Teachers Association to the Black Lives Matter at School, to even the Chicago Teachers Union, who's been known to, when they're bargaining for their rights, to always include early childhood things, right? More play, more time in that space for that. So we're very proud of that work, and we're proud to be part of it and to support it. And we do lots of different things to support that work, right? Founded by Nancy Carlson Page and Diane Levin. As an advocate, as a national advocacy organization, we try and support early childhood educators and parents and caregivers in very different ways. We offer mini grants. Most people don't know that. 4 times a year, we give out $250 to $500 mini grants to individuals, not just nonprofits, right? As long as you're doing advocacy work and you're trying to advocate for early childhood. So sometimes people want to do something for their program. We're like, can you turn that into an advocacy event? And they do, right? And those are the things we try and support and fund as well. We launched our banned book club because, banning books is an awful, awful thing and we don't support it. So we've got a list of banned and challenged books across the country, and we've been featuring those books for young children that we really want them to read, to be familiar with, right? So you can check out our website and our YouTube page for those short little features where we're promoting that. We have an amazing podcast coming back with Keisha Reed, who's an amazing early childhood educator in Maryland. She took a little hiatus as she was developing a new program, but she's back and we're starting a new season of the podcast, and the first episode is going to come out really soon, and it's a great way to engage with voices in the field. Last year, we launched 6 regional working groups, and so they're working on doing advocacy at the local level in different ways, and we're really excited to keep that momentum going. We have an advocacy map where we're trying to highlight all the early childhood advocacy happening across the country. We launched a campaign. We have some new national advisors to help bring new energy and thoughts into our movement, and we have our Professional Learning Institute, right? So there's just so much that we're doing. So all you need to do is sign up for our website. If you go to our homepage at the bottom of DEY.org and just sign up to stay involved, get the newsletter every month, you'll be privy to all the information and all the great things that we're doing, and you can be a part of and support our work. Let me make sure, yes, I'm on the chat settings, everything looks good. Okay. All right, so why this framework? So in 2020, one of our funders, said, hey, we'd like to offer up any funding, to organizations being impacted by COVID. Let us know if there's something you're interested in. And, we're a small national nonprofit, so COVID wasn't affecting us directly, but it was at the same time as a huge racial unrest was happening in this country, right? The murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and other folks, Ahmaud Arbery, right, had the country really galvanized in the summer of 2020 around racial justice. And so it was with that idea, well, no, we don't need COVID money, but we need to tackle racial justice, right? But what does that look like as a national nonprofit in early childhood? Well, for me, I had this idea because I've been in teacher education for 20 years. I have a PhD in curriculum and instruction. And I'm like, I want to write an early childhood anti-racist curriculum. Yeah, that was a lot more intense than I thought it would be, right? But anyway, our funder agreed and said, do it. Let's do this framework, and gave us some funding back in 2020. And that's when this project began. And almost, 4 years, almost 5, but 4 years this summer. And it's finally coming out, right? And so it took a long time. And really because creating a curriculum is a lot of work. So I kind of revamped it and scaled it down and said, what we really need is a framework, right? A curriculum framework for adults, for teachers, for caregivers, for parents who work with young children, a framework to help them think about what does it mean to do anti-racism work in early childhood education. And then once I looked at that, one of the first goals was, well, you have to foster positive or healthy racial identity development. And so that's what this framework is. This is the first part of a larger framework, right? But if I kept working on the entire anti-racist curriculum framework for early childhood education and care, it would never get done, right? So we decided to put out this first part, this first goal, and to work with it, and then hopefully have time and energy and commitment and more people working with us to get this going. So although this was my idea, I work really closely with my good friend, my good educator and activist and organizer, Alba Lamar, on the first 2 years of this project, right? And so she helped me think through the goals of an anti-racist curriculum framework, what would be included in all of them, and the different parts. And a lot of her work will come out in the later pieces. And so then, I tackled this first goal, but she was a very instrumental support of this, along with our funder, along with all my colleagues at Defending the Early Years, and some of my friends who helped review and give feedback as well to that. So again, thinking about why we need to address anti-racism in early childhood, one of the things that really, these are the 4 things that really kept playing in my mind as to why this is important. One, racial identity is not really taught in early childhood teacher education, and I'll talk more about that in my experience. Internalized racial inferiority, which is what many racialized Black children and other racialized children experience, is still happening. Attacks on diversity, equity, inclusion were bad then, and they're even worse now in the current situation that we find ourselves in. And most importantly, is that we need to address the elephant in the room, which is that all of us, especially young children, are constantly being socialized around our identities And that socialization is either healthy or unhealthy. And it is the job of early childhood teachers, parents, and caregivers to support healthy identity development, right? We need to just say that this is work that we are doing as early childhood educators. So let's talk a little bit more about each piece, right? So I've been teaching about racial identity in early childhood since I discovered Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Beverly Daniel Tatum. Yes, thank you. I will slow down. I always need those hints because I do talk really fast. And I forgot to mention there's closed caption available too if you need. I believe you can turn that on using controls on the bottom of your screen. All right. So this book, and this cover is her redo. I think it was 20th anniversary. She redid and added some stuff. But I had the original book, right? A friend of mine gave it to me when I was an undergrad. It didn't come up in any of my classes about teacher education. But I remember reading it and I was just being blown away, right? There's a chapter early on where she talks about how young children develop their identity around race, right? And the misconceptions that they have and the questions that they have and what they're really going through. And she introduced me to the research that psychologists have been doing for years on racial identity development, right? And after reading the book and getting into it, I immediately started teaching it in my college courses as I was doing teacher education work. So often I taught diversity courses, so that would be the main reading. I taught an American diversity education course at Howard University for many years, and I used this book. I taught another diversity course at Trinity College in DC, and I used this book. And then I went to Sarah Lawrence, and I actually redeveloped an entire course to focus on identity, right? So we looked at family and identity and culture in terms of child development in this course, and I was able to use this book. And it was great. My students never heard of it. They were getting this introduction. They were getting this understanding. We went deeper and deeper every year, and that was helpful. But then I realized it was just me, right? And if students didn't have me as their professor, they weren't getting this information. Another thing that made me really think about the importance of learning about racial identity was attending the Bank Street Black Lives Matter School Week of Early Childhood the Early Childhood Symposium in 2020. So Takima Bunch-Smith then was the director of the center, and I know I'm gonna mess it up, I think it's like Race, Culture, and Equity at Bank Street, and she had been part of the Black Lives Matter School movement and started organizing an annual early childhood event during the Week of Action. And in 2020, I got to attend, and there was the flyer there where it was exploring the intersection of gender and race for children ages 0 to 8. And during the session, Takima said, she had asked, asked people, how many professional developments have you been in that explicitly talked about Black children or Black kids at all? And it was very few people said that, right? So we're still seeing in their field that although race and culture and identity are big issues, we're not talking about what really impacts young Black children and children of color in terms of their racial identity and development. I also interviewed Takima for a chapter in the book that we did for Black Lives Matter at School. And I love this quote that I decided to put in here from her chapter where she said, a substantial part of the socializing piece of early childhood education is to speak objectively to what all children need, such as all children need care and relationships. But nobody would say what it means to be understood culturally and what impact race and racism have on the field of early education. And so those conversations were in my mind thinking about, it was, how great everyone who came to that symposium, they wanted more and more. They're not getting the professional development around supporting young children, Black children, children of color in terms of racial identity. They wanted to learn more in terms of gender identity. And it's not being talked about and not enough, right? And I'm not teaching, preparing hundreds and hundreds of teachers each year who are getting this information. I'm at a small liberal arts school where I'm lucky to get 10 to 12, students in my classes to get this information. And I know I'm not the only one teaching it, but I know that most teacher education programs are not addressing racial identity in the early years. And that's a huge problem. And then this idea for me is racial inferiority, right? Which is one of the downsides of an unhealthy racial identity development. So for people of color, for Black people, for racialized people, Black, Indigenous people of color, unhealthy racial identity development means developing racial inferiority. And I talk about this more in the framework. For white people and people racialized as white or not racialized, right? Because that's the benefit of whiteness. You're not actually racialized. They develop racial superiority if they have a negative or unhealthy racial identity development. But racial inferiority is what I've been experiencing as a Black woman my entire life, right? And so on the first photo, the doll test to me was right. It's a really big, important reason about how racial identity matters, right? And how it can be unhealthy development based in the world on race-based oppression, right? And white supremacy. So if you're not familiar, this is what broke school segregation, right? Through the courts. A husband and wife couple, Dr. Stephen and Mamie Phillips Clark, were psychologists, and they did these tests with young Black children, where they presented them with a white doll and a black doll, and they asked them lots of different questions. And what they saw was that the children identified how good traits and positive traits with the white doll, negative traits with the black doll, but then identified themselves as looking like the black doll, right? So it was very clear that they had a very unhealthy racial identity development in the terms where they only had good things to say about white dolls and bad things to say about black dolls, and they saw themselves, right? And so that research was then used by Thurgood Marshall and his team of lawyers to fight against school segregation, right? And brought us to the place where we're supposed to be, right? Where schools are supposed to be desegregated. And so it was a pivotal time, right? I used the picture in the middle. That's me, 7 or 8-year-old Denisha. And I put this together in a presentation about representation. And I always said, I didn't have any images, the cartoon girl like that to see when I was young. I didn't see any images of dark-skinned Black girls in a beautiful manner, right? And though there's representation today, we know it's still not enough, right? So that's changed. And then we get to 2020, and this little girl here, Brianna. So I don't know how many of you remember this happening in 2020, but this little girl was getting her hair done, and her hairdresser had the phone out and was like kind of filming it. And she's doing her hair, and she looks at the hairdresser and she goes, "I'm so ugly." And she starts to cry, and the hairdresser's like, "Oh my goodness, what are you talking about?" Right? And so I remember seeing this video, and the hairdresser hugs her. And I remember reading all these comments, and they're like, "Oh no, somebody told that little girl she was ugly." And it hit me. And I said, "No, I don't remember anyone ever telling me as a little Black child that I was ugly, but I believed it because I had an unhealthy racial identity development most of my life, right?" So it's still happening in 2020, where this beautiful Black child looks in the mirror and sees that she's ugly, and people think, "Oh, someone's saying that to her." And that's what racial socialization means. No one has to say those words for you to believe it. It's implied, right? It's implied in the way you're being socialized about who you are as a person of color, as a Black child, as a Black girl, how the world sees you and how you perceive yourself, right? The two parts of identity development. So fortunately, the community came together. That story has a happy ending. The hairdresser made another video with Brianna where she's saying that she's beautiful and she's proud. And the community came together and they made this beautiful artwork for her. I have it in other slides, but not in this one, right? Of showing her how pretty she was. Black artists came together. And so it was good, but it just happened, right? And it still happens all the time, right? Because this is something that's a part of unhealthy racial identity development, right? So this was important to address. Also, we've been since 2020 and before, right? We've been on a wave, a pendulum back and forth about attacks on diversity, right? So right now we're currently seeing this webinar considered indoctrination, right? And wanting these people, people wanting this to be banned. We don't get federal money, so fortunately we don't have to worry about that right now, right? But like wanting to criminalize what I'm saying and what I'm giving to you here, right? We're seeing book bans, we're seeing attacks on Black Lives Matter School and CRT, critical race theory, is racist, right? We're seeing the growth of Stop Woke indoctrination and Moms for Liberty. When Black Mermaid came out, we saw a whole bunch of racism directed towards that, where people were revealing themselves. And what we know is that we are still not in a place of liberation and freedom for all, especially for Black people, right? And so I love the image on the bottom, which I always share, because a lot of people are like, why isn't equality enough? Well, equality doesn't do much because it just gives people the same and not what they need. Equity is better, right? Because equity gives people what they need, right? And so you can see in an equitable situation, all three of those people can enjoy watching the baseball game over the fence. But even equity is not enough, because the reality is that our lives are so uneven and there's so much oppression and so much injustice, right? That some people are way, way far advanced and some people are way, way far down. That what we need is full liberation, right? We need to remove all of the barriers that prevent our full access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. right? And so it's important that we resist in many ways. And so defending the early years is all about resisting. And that's why we are releasing this framework in a time, because we believe diversity is not divisive, right? And that we must continue to push against all of these things that try and turn early child education and just the field of education into a place where white supremacy and hate flourish, right? We know that we have the power to change that. And so lastly, we have to dispel the myth that young children are too young to talk about race. I love this image. It's in the framework. It's a great image to show. The research is out there clearly about how young children develop about race, how they understand race and color and skin. And so it's happening, right? And so one of the things I say in the framework is we can no longer hold on to the misconception that children are too young for this vital work. And instead we must recognize how racial identity development can be healthy and unhealthy, and accept our role in ensuring all children develop healthy racial identity development. But a lot of that work has to begin with us, because as I said before, I had a very unhealthy racial identity development. It took me years to get over it, right? And so a lot of the work in the first part of the framework is for teachers to unpack their socialization around racial identity. Because if you're not in a healthy racial identity space, right, then you're gonna have a hard time helping young children to do that. But that's what I mean by addressing the elephant in the room. We need to stop pretending that young children don't notice race, don't notice skin color, don't enact racial superiority and racial inferiority in the classrooms, right? And don't need our support and our guidance and our language and our tools to help them make sense of these experiences and to develop healthy identity. One of the other things I've been thinking about is how to center this work around one of the biggest tools in the early childhood education and care space, which is anti-bias, right? So most of us are familiar with the anti-bias framework, and some people will say, well, we've got anti-bias, do we really need anti-racist, right? And so I'm familiar with the anti-bias framework. I put a picture of the goals here in case you're not sure and don't remember them, right? But developing children's sense of identity and esteem, being comfortable with difference, recognizing bias and stereotypes, and taking action against bias, right? And it looks beyond just race because it's anti-bias. So it looks at race and gender and class and ability and language, right? And all of these things, which are super important. But I believe that we need to advance anti-bias to anti-racist. Anti-bias is an amazing foundation to do this work, but it doesn't directly address anti-racism and specifically anti-Blackness, right? Which was something that comes up in the overall framework, right? So again, there are 4 goals for the anti-racist framework that we are developing. And this is goal 1, promote healthy racial, ethnic, and cultural identity development. The second is to recognize and resist racism and anti-Blackness, right? That is super important, right? That children understand what is racism, what it looks like when it's happening, whether it's at the individual level, right, or the systemic level, and how to resist, and understanding anti-Blackness as a particular part of racism, right, anti-Blackness that affects Black people, and that is harder for some people to spot, right? They don't always see the difference, right? And so that's in that next part. Then we want to look at strengths-based curriculum approaches for honoring diverse groups. A lot of our approach to doing this work comes from this very deficit lens, and that's problematic, right? So we really want to start in the early years that if we're going to be anti-racist, we're going to take a strengths-based approach, right, to helping children learn about themselves and other groups of people. And then we want to end with an intersectional approach to identity development. It is about race. Race is an important social construct, but there's also gender. There's also age. There's also ability. There's also sexual orientation. There's also so many things out there, right? And so if we then prepare young children to really think about identity development and all the different facets, right, we're going to support them in overall achieving anti-racism, right, in their work and their attitudes about life. So the framework has 3 main goals. The first is to understand socialization of social identities. So I use a lot of work from Bobby Harrow, who has an amazing cycle of socialization theory that I use in the framework and talk about. And the work on social identities, naming all your social identities and understanding whether you are in a subordinate, right, part of a racial identity or a target part, right? Like, are you, in race, right? White people are on the privileged side of that social identity, where Black people, Asian people, Latinx people, they're on in other Middle Eastern, right, cultures, Arabs, they're on another side, right? And so we can look at gender, sexual orientation, ability, age, nationality also comes up, other things, right, to think about. Religion, I think I mentioned that as well too. So we spend a lot of time just exploring your own socialization, social identities, and understanding the process of socialization, right? Then we get into racial identity itself, right? Recognize how racial identity develops. And what's interesting around this work that I got to explore, so when I was teaching my class with my students, I found all the major theories of racial identity development. So like there's one on African American, Black people, racial identity development, white identity development, Latino identity development, right? There's biracial. I think I found Asian and an indigenous one as well too. So my students only had to read one of they could pick which one. I had to read them all, right? So I kind of got a really good understanding of what the research has shown about identity development. And one of the things I noticed is that most of that research starts in adolescence and adulthood, right? Because they say there's usually something that happens, an incident, right, that kind of makes someone realize that how they see themselves racially might be different than how others perceive them, right? And it's usually that first encounter. For different groups, it's different, right? But I wanted to focus on what does this look like for young children? How are they making sense of how they perceive themselves racially and how others perceive themselves, right? That is racial identity, the 2 points, right? And so we talk about racial identity development in early childhood, what that looks like. And then we get into the meat of it, which is to foster healthy racial, ethnic, and cultural identity. So there's a lot of definitions, there's a lot of definitions to go over, there's a lot of text, right, information. I've cited all of the folks that have that I've read, right, that I've included their materials in this work as well too. And then we end with some scenarios, right? So crafting these scenarios where what does this look like in early childhood classroom? I think there are 4 scenarios or 5. There's also some examples. What does it sound like for a child, for a Black child, or an Indian American child, or a Mexican American child to say what does it sound like if they're engaging in racial inferiority talk and behaviors, right? What might they say? And then on the flip side, what does it sound like when white children are engaging in racial superiority talk, right? So I have some examples of that in there. Conversation starters, right? Things you can say to young children to kind of help them address this as well too. And things not to do, right? There's a lot of things not to do, right? We want to affirm children's race and identity, but please don't touch people's hair because they're not pets, right? So I shared a lot of those things as well too, and hope that they'll be helpful for you as well. All right, it's 7:30. I do want to make sure that let me check. If we have any questions for the Q&A, that you put those in there. I'm going to go ahead and drop the link to the framework in here so that people have it. Okay, I just have like a couple more slides. So I just want to pause for a second and remind people that the Q&A function is open. So you can check. I haven't seen it. It is open, right? Did I open it? Yeah, there it is. Okay. I don't see any questions. Okay, so yes, there was one question and it was answered. Okay. So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and put those in there. All right, so let's talk briefly about the next steps, what we're hoping to do with the framework. So it's available. It's going to be available. You guys are getting it. It'll be tomorrow morning on our website. We'll email it to everyone who's in our network and our contacts so they have a copy. And this webinar will be made available for people to take a look at as well too. Then we are offering a course in our subscription-based program called the Reflective Practitioner Series. So we started this last year and we wanted to find ways to go deeper with smaller groups of educators, early childhood educators around different topics. So we did our first series last year, led by one of our national advisors, Keisha Marks, on Childhood Protection Hub. And so we're doing the second one on racial identity in the early years, a framework for educators, caregivers, and parents. So that's your first opportunity to go deep into the framework, and you can do that for the low price of $25 a month by subscribing to our practitioner series. We're doing it through our Patreon, so the link will bring you to Patreon and you'll subscribe there. And it'll probably be about 3 months. February, March, and April will take us through the framework. And so hopefully that's a good way. And it's open to as many people who are willing to join. There'll be live Zoom classes that I'll also record. And then there'll be some asynchronous work for you to do, reflective workbook pages, and lots lots of resources and videos for things to do, but it's really just to support you going through the framework. One of the feedback I got when I engaged with educators across the country about the framework was, what this needs support, like just giving me this on my own is a lot. So we wanted to make available to people, and you can download it and read it in shorts, but we also wanted to offer the support. So that's one way you can do. The other thing is to bring me and Defending the Early Years to you and your folks for training, workshop training, professional learning community. We are open. My email is going to be on the last page, and I'll share that with you. But if you want to put together some type of training or group and you have an idea, please let us know. We'd be happy to come in. And it doesn't have to just be me. Of course, I created this framework, but Takima Bunch-Smith, as I mentioned, is one of our national advisors. She does this work. Her work is amazing. I've been to her sessions. They are amazing on the same topic. And so she could definitely take this framework along with her other work. And she's someone I would definitely recommend as a trainer. And others, Key Growth is another person. They do amazing work. And they also gave me some feedback on this. And I know that they are available for support and training. And they do a lot of this work too. And there are others, right? Megan Madison, Lelania Garcia. There's just so many people I know who are doing this training and work. So reach out and I'll put you in touch with myself or any of them, and we'd be happy to support you in that way. And we're also looking to get into research. One of the things we launched as part of the Professional Learning Institute is our research into practice sessions, where we try and take some of the research and put it out there. And so I am writing, after this, in the next 3 days, I have to put together a huge grant application. I'm trying to get funding to engage a 3-cohort study. I have colleagues in Wales and London who are also trying to do this work. So we're getting together, we're trying to get a cohort of teachers in each location to do a summer training and then spend a year doing professional development with us, right? We're really focusing on the teachers being the ones to let us know, how does this work? Like, how are you supporting children in your classroom? And not so much studying the children, but studying the teachers. I think that's one thing I forgot to mention. One of the ways I think this is separate from the anti-bias framework is that we focus on the teachers more, and anti-bias is both, but they really focus on the children, right? Their goals are for the children, where our goals are really for the educators as well too. So I just want to put that out there. So yeah, and if we don't get the funding, we're still going to do it. We probably won't have 3 cohorts in 3 countries because that costs money, but we are hoping to still do. I know at DEY will still do a smaller cohort through our own resources, through our own funding that we have, but we hope we get the research grant to really do this. And if you know of any other funding, it's really about materials, but also stipends. You know, we want to pay early childhood teachers for their time for doing this work. I'm all about stipends. All the research projects that I've funded, when I'm able to give participant stipends, we have a really good experience. So I'm hoping that we can do that as well. And so we're open to other suggestions. We'll be writing and publishing, of course, all of that stuff, more workshops, but these are just a few of the ideas we have right now. And so there's lots of ways for you to engage with this work. And so as I mentioned, here are the QR codes. So top left is the framework in the dark blue. And then I put a QR code for the National Black Lives Matter School 2025 Week of Action. So you can see all the events. Today was the second event for day 2. Tomorrow, I think there are also 2 events, and then Thursday, and then there's also one on Friday. And of course, these are national. You might have local Black Lives Matter at School events in your area. I know the New York City crew is doing local events, Seattle, Los Angeles, Maryland, Howard County, Maryland, and other cities as well too. So make sure to plug in with your local group, but if not, you can definitely join all of our national organization events. Bottom left corner is the Defending the Early Years 2025 Black Lives Matter Source Resource link guide. I created one last year, and so I updated it, and we just have tons of resources there, really focused around doing this work with young children, right? So as I mentioned, Lelania Garcia is a New York City kindergarten teacher, educator, who created her and Karen Davison created 2 books for young children movement, published by Lee and Lowe, and she took the principles and wrote them in really child-friendly language. So those resources there as well. And then in the far right, you'll see the link to the DEY Reflected Practitioner Series that takes you to our website, where you can go in and see the course offerings and subscribe to our Patreon and access it that way. All right, we have a Q&A in the chat, but that's okay. Let's see. It's such a delicate dance, especially in the still mostly segregated US, to give kids a blueprint of understanding their experience in terms of an open discussion about race, addressing a very hard topic with honesty and bravery, and pigeonholing kids, shoving them in stereotype boxes. How would you recommend starting this vital conversation, making sure that kids understand that they experience things differently, not because they're ontologically different, but because of a long, huge history of structured racism while emphasizing that very important fact that they are not alone? That's a great question. Ariel, I think, Ariel, thank you. That's a very good question. I love it. So yeah, it's a lot, right? First of all, I think when people always say you do this work, you know, one, are you calling children racist? And two, what if a child calls you racist, right? Let's address those right away. I do not believe children are racist, right? In the sense that I don't believe children have the power, right? Racism is prejudice plus power. Children do not have the power to enact, right? Any malice thought that they might have. But I do know, and I've witnessed and I've seen children engage in racial inferiority and racial superiority talk, right? I've had it directed at me. I've seen it. Again, am I saying that child's being a racist? No, I'm saying that child is having racial identity development and so it's unhealthy. And they're either espousing racial inferiority messages that they've received, or they're espousing racial superiority messages that they've received. And it's our job to address both, right? So I'll start with that. And then the second question is, will you start doing this work and then a child's going to call you racist? And I know that happens, right? I know kids go home and, you know, they hear things and they say it, and a lot of times they still don't quite know what's racist and what's not racist, and they're trying to make it figure it out. And so, you know, I've had teachers tell me, you know, we do Black Lives Matter at school, and then I tell a kid to stop playing around his desk, and he's like, you racist, right? And I get it. And again, kids are being kids, right? They're gonna test the boundaries on things, and they're gonna say things about them, right? So yeah, some kids are gonna call you out and say, oh, making me do my homework is racist. And you know, we can talk about homework being problematic on another level, right? But part of our job is to help them understand what really racism is and what it isn't, and know that they're going to conflate the two at times, right? Here's the thing. I'm not asking you to introduce this to something to kids. Kids are already aware of it. That's what we really need to start with. The idea is that kids are very aware. They're saying things all the time. If you step back and listen, right, you'd be surprised what you're hearing and what you actually don't pick up as racial talk, right? Racial socialization in young children. So as many of you probably knew from the early childhood community, Vivian Gusson-Paley was an amazing early childhood teacher from Chicago. And her book, White Teacher, I think really, really shows this, right? So it was published in the late 70s, I believe. She's in Chicago, you know, feeling like progressive white teachers at this integrated, you know, public school in the kindergarten program. And the Black parents are like pissed, right? They're like, y'all are not addressing this stuff. And most of the teachers don't want to hear it. We're doing the best we can. We're working in this integrated school. We're not the problems, right? But Vivian was like, you know what? I don't know. Maybe these parents are right. So let me just see what I'm not dealing with. And so she just kind of listened to kids and started to pick up on the racial talk. And she realized that when Black students engaged in racial talk, she actually ignored it. She didn't really pay attention to it. She didn't know what to say or do, right? She struggled, right? And she had to start unpacking a lot of her identity as a white Jewish woman in the classroom and what that meant for her. And so I think that's the starting point, is that if you just stop and listen to what the children are saying, you're going to already see that they're already having these conversations in different ways. You're just ignoring it because you've been taught to. Part of your socialization, from that quote from Dakima, is that you've been socialized to not see race in early childhood, to ignore it, to think that children aren't able to do it, and that if they are saying something, they picked it up from their racist uncle. I don't know how many parents have told me that. Oh, he must have got that from his racist uncle. I'm sorry, all your children have a racist uncle, but no, this is not just coming from that one person. These are messages that children are picking up around the world, right? In different ways, right? And so we really need to think about how that's happening. And so a lot of the training that we'll do as teachers is asking them to just listen to children during their play, during their interactions, right? Hear what they're saying and notice, right? When they're bringing up and saying things about race, skin color, ethnicity, culture, right? In a way that might be inferior or superior, right? And then how do you then address that with young children? So when it's already happening, it's great. And I heard you say something today, friend, and I want to talk to you more about that. Can we talk more about what you said earlier about her not being able to be a princess because her skin was too dark? Can we talk about that? Like, you can bring it up once you know what the kids are already talking about. You use it as a jumping point. And the one thing I will say is, when we're really good at this as early childhood teachers, mainly women, is when we hear things about gender. I don't know about you, but when my kindergarten said something about gender, I was quick to jump in there. Girls don't have Power Rangers. What you mean girls don't have Power Rangers? He's like, no, they don't. I said, yes, they do. I have Power Rangers. I'll bring them tomorrow. I didn't, but I showed up the next day with a bunch of Power Rangers to prove this little boy wrong, that girls can have Power Rangers, right? And it's not, you know, so we're quick when we hear things, right? If you hear someone saying something about religion, right, or about gender, or even about other areas, we're quick to notice it. But when it comes to race, we don't hear it. because we have been socialized not to. So we have to start listening to what the children are already talking about and having these conversations with them. And it's an ongoing process, and it doesn't just happen all in one day. And it's like, check, you've got healthy racial identity development. It's a progress for your entire life. I'm still dealing with parts of the unhealthy racial identity I had as a young child. And I'm still trying to process them now as a 47-year-old Black woman, mother of two, right? I'm still having to process those things. It doesn't just go away. And so a young child might come to you one day and want to talk about it, and then they might not want to talk about it again. But 3 years from now, something might spark them and they might remember what you said, right? We know that we don't know where the seeds that we plant are going to blossom, when they're going to blossom, but we know they're going to blossom. So we want to plant those seeds now, right, for young children so that they have the tools and an understanding as they get older. One of the things Beverly Daniel Tatum talks about her book is a story, you know, she's in a grocery store with her son and they were talking about something, and all of a sudden she realizes that he's like 3 and she's got to give him a story like about enslavement, not because that's how you teach Black history, but because of the conversation they had. And so she had to do it very quickly, very short, hit the main points, which is like this happened, and really helping kids understand, didn't happen to me, it didn't happen to grandma, it didn't happen to grandma's grandma, it didn't, right? It happened a very, very long time ago. But this thing was done, right, to Black people, and it's kind of impacted where we are today. And he didn't want to talk about it again for a very long time, right? But she gave him enough information to move on. So you give them enough information, you mention certain things, maybe you have a puppet show about it. Makai Kellogg, who's a great early childhood teacher, loves using puppets, right, to help students work out stories and issues, right? So maybe you hear something's happening in a class and you hear children enacting racial superiority messages, right? Denying children access to play or other spaces based on some part of their identity. So maybe you bring that in through puppetry for the whole class to talk about, right? Without signaling that one child, but getting them all to see, because kids are really great at seeing it happen to other things, but not necessarily when they're doing it, right? And then also having those one-on-one conversations. I remember when I was teaching at a preschool in Indiana, one of the little girls was very exclusionary in her play, very mean. It was a little bit of racial superiority, but just in general, just mean girl stuff. And so she was after school for a little while, and I was talking to her about it, and I just said, and she shared that she had no friends in preschool last year. And then I got to understanding why she was so protective of her friend group now, because she didn't want to be on the outskirts and have no friends anymore like she did before. So she was very protective and had this mean girl attitude. So we talked about how to like have friends and all of that. But it was, we just had the opportunity to talk, right? And a lot of that's what this is. It's just having conversations with children that, they'll go in their mind, they'll go into their toolbox and they'll pull it out and they'll use it one day. Oh yes, thank you, Julie Lohman. And Juma Jordan is also a longtime expert in this sort of training and coaching. She's in California on the West Coast, for those of you who are there. Thank you for sharing that. I totally forgot to mention her and her work, so I appreciate that. All right, I'm gonna dip into the Q&A, so I hope that's helpful. I'd love to hear how you address children's activism. Okay, you mentioned if you're affirming their race, you're also affirming their ethnicity and culture. And I hear students confused about the inclusion of ethnicity and racial identity work because ethnicity is such a broad and sometimes vague term. Could you speak on this? Sure. So it's hard, right? Because for some people, race and ethnicity and culture are linked. And for some people, they're very distinct, separate things, right? It's actually the research on identity development for Latinos and Indigenous and Asians and biracial people are actually very different because a lot of those are ethnic, right? For Latinos, it really depends on how connected you feel to your ethnicity, right? Do you feel Mexican American or Colombian or Venezuelan or right or not, right? That matters in terms of how you develop racial identity. So what I'm saying is that they all have to be affirmed, right? When I say we're doing racial identity development, we're also thinking about children's ethnicity and we're also thinking about children's culture. Very much for me, this project started and it's a big part about Black children, right? And I'm unapologetically going to say that now during Black Lives Matter School Week of Action, now during Black History Month, and every day forever, right? I'm unapologetically always centering Black children and the needs of Black children, right? But when you affirm a Black child's race, right, then their ethnicity and their culture are also being affirmed, right? Whether they're connected or not. So in the framework, I break it down, right? My race is African American, is Black, but my ethnicity is Panamanian, right? I was born in Panama. My mother is Panamanian. And so that's an ethnic, right? But some people don't have that. Some people, their race and ethnicity are Black American. And we talk about that, whether American is an ethnicity, right? This is something my white students used to struggle with because they don't identify with anything other than American. And then they say, well, can American be an ethnicity? And that's, there's no right or wrong question to that. I think it's what people say when we talk about them, what's your culture, right? And what does it mean if you don't have a culture, and culture is just for other cultured people, right? So we spend a lot of time on that and we talk about that. But I think it's just important to know that you don't want to focus all on race and ignore ethnicity and ignore culture. Most of the time, for a lot of people, they're intertwined, not always, right? Culture is so dynamic, right? I might be Black, but I don't have everything in common with other Black people, right? We don't all share the same culture. This really shows up. I teach a course at Howard University, and I love it because Black people are so diverse, and I have these diverse Black students from all over the country in my class, right? And it's great. And being in an HBCU and seeing all that diversity, people think, oh, all of our experiences are the same, but no, right? Like I have students in my class who are very wealthy, privileged Black children who grew up in really wealthy, privileged households. Well, I did not, right? I come from an immigrant, poor, working class, poor class family, right? And so our differences are different, right? But we still have some shared aspects of culture that we can rely on, and some are different, right? I'm in Colombia. I'm in South America. Colombia has the 5th largest Black population in the world. I just recently saw the statistic. Brazil was #1, America was #2, Colombia is #5, and I'm in a very Black Colombian area space. So I'm perceived to be Colombian by other Black Colombians, and then I start speaking, and they're like, "Whoa, you're American, right?" But there's still some shared Black cultural stuff, even though I come from an African American background and they come from an Afro-Colombian background. Right. So there's still some shared stuff there. So it's a lot, it's complex. I can't answer it all, right? But just to know that they're intertwined, right? I see it important as race, ethnicity, and culture. Those are things we're being socialized around them all the time. Sometimes they overlap, and we need to think about how to socialize each of them very well. So to do healthy socialization around those. I hope that gets that. Carolyn, I'm so glad you're here. Carolyn is another person, Carolyn Little, that I would highly recommend doing trainings and workshops. She does this work. She organizes the Black Lives Matter School in New York City. Good to see you. Thank you. She says, I saw the framework is also for caregivers and parents. Can parents of young children also join the practitioner series? Yes, no, it's for everyone. Parents, I specifically wrote this out for parents, caregivers, and for parents, caregivers, and educators, right? Anyone who works in the lives of young children, grandparents who got time, who are maybe caring for their young grandbabies and they want to do this stuff, you are welcome to come to it as well too. We talk about education, but it's educating young children, and most of the education of young children, most of the socialization is happening before they even get to school. That's why it's so important for caregivers and parents to be a part of this, right? Because if you wait till kindergarten, you've missed the first 5 years of their life where they are being socialized around this, right? So I really want that. Thank you for that question. Curious to get your thoughts on how to address this with families so as to be sure to validate the appropriate identities, especially if a parent conveys that they feel identity is private. That's a great question, Brooke. I do this workshop for families, right? A preschool in Brooklyn brought me in, and a cooperative, I believe, and brought me in to do this work with the parents as well. And it was a great discussion because, again, there's so much diversity in the families, right? And again, some of them will say diverse identity is private, right? I think what I frame the tool, the way I use it when I get all these parents together is like, look, no, I don't want your kid to grow up and to be made famous because they did some heinous racial act, right? Racist act on, whatever it is, those things that come out every year that ruin kids' chance to go off to college and all of that. And they can agree, most of them don't want their child to do that either. And so we started that point, right? What does unhealthy racial identity development look like in teenage children, right? What does it look like? It looks like kids on a bus chanting out the N-word or doing Nazi salutes, right? It looks like Ron DeSantis, who never made it out of a certain stage of racial identity development where he's blaming minorities and blaming the victims, right? It looks like a president who is banning Black History Month, right? Because he's so threatened, right, by the advancement of people of color, right? And so, and we can all talk about that and what it looks like. It also looks like people who are oblivious, who refuse to see what's happening, right? And I specifically use the word color evasive, right, in the framework, right? We're trying to get away from some ableist language where you might have heard the color B word, right? We're saying color evasive, right? But people who refuse to see what's happening. And so getting parents to understand, they know people like that. Maybe they're like that. Maybe someone in their family's like that. And that's okay. Okay, that's one way to be. What do you want for your child? Is that what you want for your child? Or do you want your child to be the type of person who's confident around different people, can go into diverse situations, make friends, who can understand when they say something wrong or overstep, who understand the difference between saying, where are you from? And someone telling you, and saying, no, really, where are you from? And they don't do that, right? Because they know that that's problematic, right? And that's assaulting people's culture and ethnicity. And most of them want that. They want their kids to be that way. They want their kids to succeed. This is about healthy identity development. We all want our children to have healthy identity development. And so it's just super important that we do this work, right? That we do this work with them. And so parents are great. They have a lot to bring. They see it, especially one of my good friends, Ruth Rodriguez. She was really great at these discussions because she had two daughters. I believe they're Costa Rican, but she had one daughter who was really fair skinned and one daughter who was really dark skinned. And so she was able to really share for parents growing up with her daughters, watching how the world socialized them, how the world treated them, right? 100% blood sisters, but just different phenotypes in their skin, so different that they got treated very different. So parents can often bring those experiences, right? Having children, seeing their children grow up. Some parents are going to be resistant. There's always going to be resistance, right? But I think most parents want what's best for their child, and they know that I also want what's best for the child, and I want to do everything I can so that their child does not spend so many years struggling with their identity, hating themselves, trying to be raceless, trying to be anything but who they are. And that's how I spent most of my life, right? It took a long time to get to somewhere else. And some people don't make it out of that, right? Some people end up in really dark places. And so we just want what's best for children. And I think if you get on that page with parents, they're with you. And they need this information. They need this knowledge, right? Because they don't need their kid coming home talking about things that they don't know anything about. No one likes their kids making them look dumb, right? And so I think that's a huge issue, right? So how do we get the parents on board? We give them the language, we give them the tools as well, and we have them talk as well. Children's activism, that's a great question. I mean, children are activists, right? And I think I don't address it too much. I think there's space for that in the framework, recognizing and resisting anti-racism and recognizing and resisting racism and anti-Blackness. I think there's space for that kind of activism. I'm sure children are into it. I'd be happy to talk more about it. I would definitely turn to my, like I mentioned, Key Growth of Woke Kindergarten. They do a lot of work, I think, on young children as activists and others as well too. So thank you for that. It doesn't come up too much in the framework, but again, it's something that I think can easily be addressed because we know that, all of this is very important in the lives of children. All right, I'm checking the Q&A. Yes, Ajuma Jordan, thank you so much for sharing her Instagram. She's also presents at NACI every year. I can never get into her session because it's always standing room only. So if you're going to be at NACI, Key Growth, just look up Woke Kindergarten. Just go to Woke Kindergarten for the activism. And I know they have created some materials around, actually they had a Zine they did for children who went to a protest or were protesting. They do a lot of work. Yeah, Key Growth Woke Kindergarten is in there. Yeah, Ajuma's fabulous. Megan Madison is the author of the Our Skin, the First Conversation series. So it's a series of books for young children. One of them is Our Skin. That's a great one. And that's in there as well too. Lelena Garcia, as I mentioned, the kindergarten teacher. If you go to Lee and Low and look up What We Believe, I think those resources are also on, I know they are. Her books are also on the resources for the Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action. Resources that we created are there as well too. And there's many more. Takima Butch Smith, she has a whole consulting group. And I'll get the link. I'll make sure you get a link of all the resources. Dr. Aisha White, yes, the executive director of the Pride program. If you're in Pittsburgh or Pennsylvania, I cite Pride in this research. They're an amazing organization that does a lot of work on racial identity development in the early years. Another organization that I follow, Embrace Race. They are a great organization. They do amazing work in this field as well. So there are so many, right? We are not defending the earliest. We are not the first. We're not the only. So we definitely want to highlight and promote. And again, I put a ton of resources linked in the framework as well too. And I'll be getting more for the Rec Selected Practitioner series. I'll getting more videos and other tools together that can help you. But there's lots of information on there. And we encourage folks to really reach out to those who have been doing this work for a while. And to see how they can incorporate this work. I went to a lot of the early childhood educators I know doing this work and asked them, how would you use this framework? And it's something that you would find useful. And so that is what we want, and that's what we like. All right, so thank you so much. I think we're right at time. And so thank you so much for joining us. Everyone who registered today will get an email tomorrow with a link to the video and also the framework. If you did not get it, you'll get a copy, a PDF copy. It'll also be up on our website. There'll be a whole page that I need to create tomorrow for the framework and the materials as well too. And so we'll add that as well. We hope that you'll check out the rest of the events for Black Lives Matter School Week of Action. Tomorrow's Wednesday, and I know we have some events coming up. Chanel, I don't know if you're still there. I don't know if tomorrow's Disability Justice. I think it is.
Yes.
Yes, and then Thursday is the art, right? Generational Art Project, I believe.
Yes, and then we're also having an information session before that on Palestine in our schools curriculum, and then after that will be our kind of like artful rest session.
Yeah.
And then on Friday we're closing out the week, and we'll be listening some music, playing some trivia, and maybe learning some dance moves throughout the generations.
Oh, I just figured out how to let you chat with everyone. I'm so sorry.
No
I
worries.
couldn't see the full thing when I was sharing the screen. I got it now. Yes, thank you for that, for those events. So we'll be sharing them. If you followed Defending the Earliers on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, you will see every day. I'll be posting all the different events. I also had a cute little way to frame the principles for early childhood. So I grouped them: I matter, you matter, we matter. And so I'll be sharing those out as well too, if you're looking for a way to share those. We also have a student creative challenge where you can invite young kids to participate. And young kids make cool art sometimes. We typically get a lot of middle school, high school students, but I'd love to see more early childhood art. So that information will also be shared, and it's also available on the website. I don't think you can save the chat, but I will save the chat, and I will send out resource document with all the links, all the things that I mentioned today to everyone who registered. So we will definitely get that going out to you. So thank you all so much for coming. And yes, I hope you enjoy the framework. I'll be looking for feedback. My email, I'll throw in here really easy: denishajones@dey.org. You can send any feedback, reach out about any trainings that you're interested in doing. And yeah, we hope to see you around using this and doing great work.